Since I think we're pretty much collected here, I think we'll just go ahead and get started. Do you all know who we are? Do we need to introduce ourselves?
I think it's good.
Are we
Just a
good?
quick.
Are we good?
So we've got we can do our intros as part of our.
Yeah, as part of
statements.
our.
All right, good. All right.
Yeah.
Well, since I'm batting first here, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Roy Jones.
Sound.
Thanks, sorry.
Project.
I've been part of the Brushwood family now for close to 30 years. I was the original producer of Series Rising, and took a couple of years off to go and finish my master's degree, and came back, and they said, well, you got yourself a really nice camera, why don't you be our staff photographer? So that's been my job since 2007. We last year did a talk on cultural appropriation and how it affects the neo-pagan and alternative spirituality community, and this year we kind of got mistagged in the program. We wanted to continue that theme, but we wanted to talk generally about racism itself, which is kind of at the basis of the problem of cultural appropriation. And I was asked to start this, and the first thing that you have to understand, the biggest problem we always have to overcome in trying to discuss this is simply the fact that most people have completely the wrong idea about what the word racism actually means. And that is simply because the way words get used. I always tell people whenever I run into somebody who wants to take me up on this thing online, they always immediately go to Merriam-Webster dictionary to come up with the definition of racism out of the dictionary, which simply kind of defines racism as being hardly any different from bigotry. And racism is not bigotry as such. They are aligned, but they are not the same thing. When we're talking about racism, especially if we're talking about it, we're talking about an ideology. We're talking about a social structure that is based on the idea that you can rank groups of people by whatever you consider to be their race. And what has been the dominant approach to this idea has been one that is put with the so-called Nordic races, which is the people up in the far northwest of Europe who started this whole mess in the first place, put themselves at the top, put the Africans at the bottom because they were the ones who were going to be the servants in this whole system of slavery-based production that they built, and they put everybody else somewhere in an intermediate level in the middle. So a lot of you people who think you may be white in the old racism structure, no, you're kind of okay. If you're German, maybe. If you're Southern European, it ain't happening. Okay? If you're from Asia, or you're from Africa, or you're from the Americas or the Pacific Islands, absolutely not. You get assigned somewhere in the middle. And there actually were kits that the East India Company used to carry around with them because they were going around plundering different parts of the world so that they could decide exactly where on the spectrum they were going to place the people that they were about to take over, push off their land, and turn them into slaves. They had hair samples, eye color samples, nose shape samples, head measurements, and all the rest of it to define these people. And these were not just wacko theories that were sort of out on the margins. Very important, major thinkers, that people whose work you may have read, who you respect. Hegel, Nietzsche had definite theories about race, and that put everybody who was not one of them somewhere on the outside. Important people in religion. If you read Ibram Kendi's book, Stamped from the Beginning, which is on the reading list we're going to hand out, Kendi talks about Cotton Mather, one of the first of the great American preachers, and about how his preaching was specifically focused toward maintaining that ideology of keeping the African people on the bottom and the white people on the top, because let's face it, they were the ones running the country, and the Africans were the ones providing the labor. And the labor was not just doing a little bit of farming. It was providing an absolute fundamental support to the American economy. If you read Sven Becker's book, Empire of Cotton, he talks about how cotton was absolutely essential to the American economy. 40% of America's foreign exchange is coming from the fact that it was providing 80% of the world's supply of cotton. And that's only mentioned in one industry and only mentioned in the international trade. It was absolutely fundamental in the American economy too. Not just in the South. They show you pictures in your little history books of cotton bales sitting on the Mississippi River. Where the hell do you think that cotton went? They didn't have factories in the South, they had to go north. They went north with thousands of people. I remember somebody saying, oh, my family was never involved in slavery. Well, they worked the cotton mills. Where do you think the cotton came from? The cotton was produced entirely by slave labor. It went up to the north to be processed, turned into cotton goods finally, that got spread out all over the country. And the big bankers like J.P. Morgan and Indian are making a huge amount of money by financing the industry from the planters in the South all the way up to the manufacturers and distributors in the North. They were financing the ships that carried cotton in the overseas trade. They were providing the insurance for those companies. They were also providing dead peasant insurance that those companies took, that the planters took out on the slaves themselves.
Excuse me,
So-
can you repeat that? I didn't hear.
They were providing what's called dead peasant insurance on the bodies of the slaves themselves.
Okay,
So
thanks.
people were making money left, right, and center out of this, and there was a whole structure of law that rose up around it because this is a central piece of the economy. That continued past the abolition of slavery into what we might call slavery 2.0. Everybody else calls it sharecropping, which is basically a form of debt bondage. The whole people owning the land, restrict their movement so they could not leave the land, make sure they could never acquire wealth, and keep them working working to the demands of the planters. Those laws continued well up into the 20th century. As a matter of fact, they weren't finally made illegal until the 1960s. It was what we call the Jim Crow laws. They were finally made illegal by the Civil Rights Act of 1965. Now, why do I mention all of this? Because all of this is still with us. The fact that we passed a few laws doesn't mean that everybody suddenly said, oh, well, we need to stop doing this. No, it's still going on. Now, two things. Why should you, as a bunch of Democrats, white people mostly, care about any of this? Two words. A phrase invented by an eminent American social scientist, maybe along.
I'm sorry, when this thing is going by, I don't know if it's just me, but
No, I can't hear from there.
Yeah.
we have to wait until the bloody engine is out of the way.
As long as we've interrupted your accent. I don't care about that. It was what we agreed to, so I thought I'd mention it.
Let me get through this as quickly as I can. There's a term called civic culture. What it means is a sense of everybody within the society all being a part, all being all in together, having a certain sense of trust and reliance on each other. And anytime you have any kind of system that separates people from one another, that parcels them out, says you're going to be treated differently from everybody else, that corrodes the civic culture. And right now, we have two very serious problems going on. The Civil Rights Act has been defanged. And what happened immediately was this whole series of laws got passed that were immediately intended to try to push people out to the margins in the voting system. Those are the so-called voter ID laws that had nothing whatever to do with voter ID. They're about pushing people out of the system. The other thing is, you hear about these arguments going on in front of the courts about wedding cakes. Everybody thinks this is about wedding cakes or wedding photography. It has nothing to do with either. It's about trying to gut the Civil Rights Act. It's about trying to pull out the primary support, the primary link in the Civil Rights Act, which is the public accommodations laws. It says that anybody who walks into your publicly operated place of business must be given the same service as anybody else who walks into that store. It has nothing to do with who gets to you, with whether anybody has a right to make you work for them. It says that if you set up as a public business, you have to serve all of the public. Some people say no, that if a gay couple walks into my bakery, I should be able to refuse to make a cake for them. If that part of the law goes, if you walk into a store with your Labradus or your Thor's hammer or your pentacle around your neck, and that Christian fundamentalist owner says, I don't want you here, guess what? You have no legal recourse. It's no longer just a problem for people of color, it's a problem for every one of us in the society. If you sit there and let these things go on because you were sitting there very comfortably in your little all-white community thinking everything's fine, and this is just a problem these other guys over here have to deal with, guess what? You are basically signing the death warrant on your own rights. Don't let it happen to you. Racism is a problem for all of us. Sexism is a problem for all of us. All of these other things that tend to push other people to the margins are a problem for all of us, because if we let it go on, what happens is we turn into what Robert Hughes said in his book, Culture of Complaint. We stop being a real society and we become a little collection of warring little communities that only identify themselves in terms of the grievances they hold against all the others. Thank you.
Hell yeah.
All right, we'll tell them about it. Friendly reminder, we all agreed we will hold our opening statements to 7 minutes. And as we also agreed, I am having a stopwatch. This is not just me being white at you.
I know that. Yes.
Okay.
My name is Mandy Kibowitz Delfaver, and my stage name is Fat Mandy, and I am a Jew with extremely pagan leanings. And I worship and I sing with anybody and everybody that likes to praise the divine. So, thank you, Roy, for providing that. It was just, it's so important that we understand the historical and contextual, the historical and sociological context for understanding that racism isn't just, I don't like you because you're a different color. You know, I was taught at a very young age that racism is bigotry plus power. So if we are living in we are living in a white supremacy. And so it is therefore impossible for a person of color to be racist against a white person. In today's society, in this age, it's just impossible. They could be bigoted, they might not like you, but their dislike, their personal feelings don't carry the weight,
The power.
the power of you know, it doesn't have the same economic repercussions. It doesn't have the same, you know, it's just so ingrained in our laws. You know, the Jim Crow laws, though technically they were repealed, you know, in the 60s, and technically we do have a Civil Rights Act. As Roy said, it's being defanged. Little things are taken away all the time. You know, the voter suppression never really went away, as we learned from the dangling chads of the 90s in Florida. For the younger people who don't remember dangling chad, that is not the name of a drag king performer. Though if I become one, it will be mine. Yes. So anyhow, it's just important to understand that racism isn't just a personal thing. It's a whole system, a systemic issue of issues. But also, I meant to say first, thank you for coming. Thank you so much for coming. You know, you could be hot tubbing, you could be chilling with a wine spritzer around the fire or whatever, and you chose to come and spend this time with us, so I know you care. And that's really the first step, is to say, you know, I am a human being living on this earth, and with whatever privilege I have, I'm going to stand up and understand, and then fight, you know, so that we can all someday, you know, work towards equity. And I don't say equality, I say equity. I mean, I think equality is a false goal. I think it's more it's not what I think, it's equity is an issue of everybody having the same chance to attain it. There's a really great article, I haven't read it yet, I'm going to put it on the reading list, but it's about how to explain white privilege to a broke white person. You know, and and it's not saying that because you're white you don't have problems. That's not the case. We all know that. We all have serious issues. Some of us are broke, some of us are disenfranchised, but we have a lot more chances to get, we didn't have the same kind of stuff put us down every single day that the people of color have to go through. So I kind of want to focus in my time, is real concrete things about what we can do. You know, we're here because we care, and if there are people in your lives who don't care, you know, and they're like, well, it doesn't affect me, then you can go back to what Roy was saying, was it will affect you soon. If they don't come for you tonight, they don't come for you tomorrow, they'll come for you eventually once they get down the list of who is what. So, but I wanted to focus a little bit on very concrete things. I find that that Facebook has fostered, and social media has fostered, this whole call-out culture, and I don't think it's helpful. I think that when we as white people see something going on, like it's real easy to turn into like this mob mentality and go after and cancel and mute, you know, but if you just take the time to like contact somebody personally and be like, hey, I noticed you did something, you need to think about it. We can't be afraid of confrontation. It's not rude, it's not mean to talk to somebody about something you saw that they did. They might not have understood it. You know, also as if you are white, learn how to step back. Like we want to help people of color have their own voices. Well, they have their own voices. You have to step back so that they can use them. So it's this whole concept of stepping up when you're marginalized and being with a group of people that will listen to you. And if you are not one of the marginalized people, stepping back so you can hear. And there is intersections. There's intersections, you know, like, there's, you know, we do have issues of sexism and homophobia and all these serious things, but just try and understand that you need to listen to people and believe them. If somebody of color says to you, I saw a racist thing or I felt unsafe because a thing happened, as a white person, you can't poo-poo them. You're like, oh, it's fine, I know that guy, he's fine, he's totally cool, you know. You have to listen, you have to believe them. It's like we're saying believe women when they say that they were victims of rape or sexism or something. It's the same thing, just believe people of color. They saw something you didn't see. If you're white, you didn't see it. Of course you didn't experience it because nobody was going to be racist towards you. To touch back on some stuff we discussed last year with the cultural appropriation, it's okay to do things that are not of your background. Like I sang for Priestess Lilith's voodoo ceremony last night with Utu, and you know, it was really important to me that we acknowledge who the teachers were, who the priests were, who the people that taught the thing was. I mean, I study belly dance, and I'm not an Arabic woman, you know, but I know who the teachers are, and we do what we can. We work to support our teachers of color. We work to support our marginalized instructors. We don't pretend we invented it. You know, am I time? Okay, I'm just going to close with President Lyndon B. Johnson once said, if you can convince the lowest white man that he is better than the best colored man, then he's not going to notice that you're picking his pocket. Hell, give somebody someone to look down upon and he will empty his pockets for you.
All right, I'm Lilith Dorsey, for those of you who haven't seen me around here the past 25 years. I am a voodoo priestess, but I suppose for the purposes of this discussion, in addition to having this lovely, naturally melanated skin, I'm also an anthropologist, and for me, what I want to talk a little bit about to start with is my work with six-time Grammy winner Dr. John, who just passed. And one of the most beautiful things to me during his funeral service was that Cyril Neville got up on stage and he said that if it wasn't for this man in front of us here in the coffin, there would not be black men and white women and black women on stage together in America. And it sunk in with me. I remember when I first started touring with him that his drummer, Roscoe Herman, who's also passed right now, an amazing man, very entertaining, we would get to the hotel and Herman would just stand in the pool. And Herman would stand in the pool because for so many years Herman was not allowed to go in the pool. Herman was forced to go in the back door. Herman was forced to take a back seat, and Mac really gave him a chance to be out there and to shine and to do his thing. And I think that's really beautiful, and I think that all of us can have these hands out and hands up for people who aren't necessarily being seen. Some of us, like me, who are struggling to be seen. You know, I talk about racism in the community, and ironically, I find that I think other than Roy talking about when he got here, this is the first time I've heard anybody say Brushwood. Several years ago at Brushwood, I had an incident where we were in a camp that's still here today, and my daughter, who loves to cook and is now very famous in the cooking world, we were making food for someone, and the Black Eyed Peas were on the radio, and somebody said, turn that damn nigger music off. And at the time,
Seriously.
we went to, yes, at the time, we went to the people whose camp it was. We went to someone who had represented themselves as being part of staff, and we very much got the same kind of treatment that Mandy was talking about. Oh, it's okay. Oh, don't worry about it. He doesn't really need it. Maybe he can apologize. He doesn't know any better. You need to be the bigger people.
Oh, yeah.
And I sat there with my daughter crying while she's going, I'm gonna poison his damn food.
My girl.
She did not. I told her she didn't have to cook for him. She didn't have to cook for anybody like that, because again, we're not just gonna be servants in the kitchen for people who are gonna treat us that way.
Look at the
And-
optics of that.
And, you know, I think at the time, we really thought we were doing the right thing. We thought we were going to the people who'd be able to help us, to people that represented themselves as people in power, and we didn't receive any help. And that made me really sad. And when I've heard of other incidences here and at other events that I do where people felt unsafe or marginalized, or that, you know, racist behavior was being directed towards them, I've done the best that I can with my limited resources to make sure that they are heard and that they do feel welcome. It's really hard. I mean, I joked for years with Roy about I would get here and it would be me and Roy and maybe 2 other people of color at the event, and that's a scary place to be in. That's a scary place to be in if you look at the history of this country, and it's somewhere just by the dynamics of it, it automatically makes you feel less safe, because you don't feel like you have people that understand really there, and you don't have people that are going to see the same kinds of things, as Mandy mentioned, that you're seeing. So I think it's important for people to recognize that when they do see people, that to make them feel welcome in whatever way they need, not what way you want, you know, what way they need. And I think that's very important, because it's not about people telling you what you need. You know, oh, you need a hug. Well, no, I have PTSD. Maybe I need you not to touch me right now. Maybe, maybe I need a cookie, or maybe I'm, you know, gluten-free and I need a piece of fruit. But it has to be listening to them and really hearing what it is that they're saying. And in some of this, people trying to help, there's been a lot of, you know, and in a way, it almost feels more hurtful. There's been a lot of white allies that have been trying to help. You know, I blog for Pathos Pagan, and there's been a couple of bloggers out there that have, you know, done articles about, you know, white fragility, or how people can be a white ally, and I read the articles, and there's not a single black person quoted. And that makes me really sad, and it feels like a slap in the face. And when I look at them getting, you know, 10, 20,000 hits, and I look at my little thing where me and my black godson are sitting there talking about racism, and we've got 65 people watched it, which was probably us sitting there, or him showing his boyfriend over and over again. Things look sexy. It makes me really sad, because we are out there. Yes, it may take some digging. We may have, because of resources or just the way the algorithms are screwed or whatever else is happening, we get forgotten and pushed lower and lower down. And part of what I would like to see happen is more people just doing those simple things. Okay, you know, I was going to wear this is my PayPal address, reparations can go to. It doesn't have to be that, although I'll give it to you if you want it. But it can be something as simple as, oh look, Lilith wrote this thing about racism, and I put it on the list. Let me share that. Let me watch it. Let me discuss it with my friends. This is her experience. What was your experience in the pagan community? Did you feel welcome? And I think inclusion is also very important. You know, my priest Lou, he gets asked a lot as a white man about, and a drummer for the New Orleans Buddhist Spiritual Temple, you know, what does he think about white people doing the religion and white people practicing the religion? And he talks a lot about that he thinks it's okay as long as they do it respectfully and with honor and giving tribute to the people. But there is a danger if you look around in the circle and it's all white people. There is a danger that some of the spirit of what was originally there is going to get lost just by virtue of you don't have that representation there. And I'm not saying we should all put our hands up and volunteer to be tokens, but people should reach out and try and make that a welcoming space that those people would want to be in, as opposed to just deciding, oh, I have my thing and they can do their thing. That's not okay anymore. You know, like I said, this is my 25th year here, and it's just not okay anymore. It's not okay. So that's what I would like to say. I'm probably not at time. Look at that.
No, you're 6:44.
See, I'm good. I'm good like that. So thank you, everybody, for coming.
And again, I want to reiterate, because I know the optics of the white chick telling the other Stop it. All right.
We
We're
agree.
using up time.
We're doing this.
We all agree, all right.
Okay.
All right, my name is Lori Woods, and I'm heathen, which is the kind of paganism most often associated as being filled with racist assholes. So, I kind of hoped you'd wear your PayPal reparations with your shirt. I wore a shirt for the truth, which is an inclusive heathen organization. And I want to speak some of my own story, and I also want to talk a little bit some words that went by that I don't know everybody necessarily had the vocabulary on. And one of them is intersectionality, which is to say understanding that when it comes to a particular situation, you may have privilege on some axes of that situation, and you may have a lack of privilege on other axes of that situation. So, for example, if I'm going around the field here, I'm going to have privilege because of my lack of melanation, and I'm going to have a lack of privilege because I am a more or less cisgendered female. And cisgendered simply means you're comfortable with the gender you were assigned at birth. I will have lack of privilege on another axis because the paganism I practice is not particularly Wiccan and only has some overlap with how Wiccans and Wiccan-derived paganisms do their thing. I will have a lack of privilege because I am not heterosexual. I will have a comparative privilege because, as a bisexual woman married to a heterosexual man, my partnership is straight passing. So that's what intersectionality is, understanding that sometimes you've got a little more privilege and sometimes you've got a little less privilege. And again, white privilege just is the definition, the second part of the definition that Mandy started, is that just because you've got, we're not saying that you don't have problems, that being white means you don't have problems, we're just saying it means you don't have problems because you're white.
As I once said in a conversation with Teresa a couple of months ago, you got 99 problems, but you're racist.
And when I do ally fails, you are all completely permitted to call me on my shit.
All right, how it should be.
So I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, a city not far from here, and a city that, as you all remember from your very neat, tidy maps of the pre-Civil War era, was on the north side. And that's true. Ohio was a state that had less de jure, which is by law, racism than other places. But let me tell you about de facto racism. Let me tell you about systemic racism. I have 4 minutes to compress 250 years of Whitey's gone white. The city of Cleveland, until relatively recently, was very firmly divided by the river in the middle. Black folks were on the east side, and even the poor white folks were on the west side. In the 70s, attempts were made to get folks to voluntarily desegregate their schools, and yes, school segregation was and is just as much a problem in the north as it is in the south. You can tell everything about where a person is likely to wind up in life by what zip code they were raised in. So I was in the neighborhood that all the white people who could afford to fled. My family was poor. Then the court order came down that said, you guys haven't worked out integrating voluntarily, we're going to force it on you. You're going to make sure that this many white children are bused to the east side, and this many black children are bused to the west side. My parents scraped together the money to send us to parochial school. My parents weren't particularly religious, but they understood the problems it would make in my education if I spent so many hours a morning being bused to the bad side of town. And so they put me in a parochial school locally, and they had the money where they could do that. And I had the benefits of having a diverse neighborhood, but I also had the privilege of making sure there was only one person in my graduating grade school class of 35 that looked like Roman. And I don't think there were any Latinos. I had that privilege, and I could see this stark cliff of socioeconomic privilege 2 years later when I went from an all-girls Catholic school to a mostly white public school in a posh middle-class suburb. Suddenly, everyone had enough books. Suddenly, there was a program that made sure gifted and talented people who were intellectually gifted and were able to test well, itself a form of privilege against the neurodiverse, but leaving that aside, who were able to therefore get what they needed to keep their brains occupied and really excel in those things that they were testing for. And I had to work hard to scale the cliff that I wasn't able to because of the socioeconomic privilege that I had lacked and could now sort of fake. My situation socioeconomically has gone up and down in the years since then, but it is always going to be easier for me to get out of that situation because of the color of my skin and because nothing about me highlights all of my weirdnesses to the world outside. And that is a consciousness I work with every day. Now, coming back to a more pagan perspective, again, yeah, heathenry. We're the one that gets accused of having the Nazis. So I'm in a branch of heathenry that says we recognize those roots. We recognize that the current modern heathen revival had its roots in the same cheerful Germanic nationalism that also gave rise to the heathens we're not talking to anymore. And we are working to overcome that. We are working to be inclusive. And so we do things like go to the Parliament of the World's Religions. And we do things like openly, well, not just welcome as in you can come, but openly reach out to, we're doing our best with non-cis het. We're gonna work up to more people of color in our religion. Because racism is some kind of bullshit, and we're each trying to do our part to overcome what was put to us in our mother's milk. And I am going to end 30 seconds early because that's a good line to end.
We're going to open it to questions and comments, so I want to raise one point that something, kind of an epiphany I had when I was about 18, that I think helps make the point of really this kind of broadening of our vision, or broadening of our understanding. I was a student at UCLA back then, and one day I picked up a copy of the Daily Bruin, the school newspaper, and read an article written by a woman who was one of the leaders of the campus feminist community. And the article was really quite well written because what she did was she explained feminism without actually co-opting any of the language or any of the ideas, but still explained feminism in terms of the civil rights movement. And that was an eye-opener for me, because all of a sudden, as I was joking with Ellie earlier this week, I said, wait a minute, we're telling that feminists are not just man-hating women in ugly shoes. They're actually, this is a civil rights movement we're talking about. Feminism, that the structural problems, the basic philosophical ideas are pretty much the same. The specific problems they're confronting are different, but the general issue is almost identical. And when you begin, and at that time, I was just really beginning to come to some kind of an adult sense politically what's going on with it. And for me, that focus, of course, is going to be the civil rights movement, and the voting rights movement. And all of a sudden, I'm realizing, wait a minute, this whole other bunch of people who are struggling with some of the same things, just in a different context. And then you begin to look a little more broadly, and you see all around you all of these people. Who was it who said, be kind, for everybody is fighting a battle you don't understand? It suddenly came clear to me. And I can't tell you that all of a sudden everything in my life changed, or I suddenly got better about everything, the way I looked at everybody. But when you take that experience honestly, when you really accept it for what it is, you cannot turn back and go back to thinking the old way. You're always going to get pushed forward, and there's always going to be this little prod going, come on, remember that thing you saw, remember that thing you learned. And I think that's very important for all of us.
Before we open the floor for questions, I want to support your point. During the fight for same-gendered marriage in California, I was living in Oakland, which is one of the most racially diverse cities in the United States. It was a white neighborhood in Oakland because segregation is everywhere. And what hurt me was the number of black churches that somehow did not understand that the fight for same-gendered people of all races to partner up and marry as they saw fit, they couldn't see it was the same struggle. And it was one of those screaming your television projects. So I can understand you coming to that realization from another angle, but it also supports the point of intersectionality.
There are a lot of ways this can happen. And the thing is, when it does happen, as I said, if if you really take the experience for what it's worth, it becomes part of your conscience. And you cannot just go back to thinking the old way. I could not go back to thinking the old way that you kind of got from the media about what feminism was about. All of a sudden, I had to start thinking of these people fighting the same kind of struggle as my people were fighting. They were just coming. They were maybe doing it in a different place, doing it in a different way, dealing with different specifics. But the fight was the same for all of us.
And Ailey, maybe you should get the first.
I just
Yes.
wanted to say, which is that I went to a panel discussion one time that had both Dyson, Professor Dyson, I think he is, I know he's Dr. Dyson, and Colonel West. And Colonel West was saying exactly what you are saying, which is that it's a civil rights issue, whether it's about sexism, whether it's about sexuality, whether it's about race, etc. And Dyson disagreed with him. My point being that what I hear a lot down where I live is, let's say, white people say, well, if they don't agree with each other, why would I care about the issues? And that is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. But it does have, am I articulating this clearly?
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
and so, and that is kind of stupid, because within each community there are going to be different opinions on certain items, and just because the opinions differ, it does not mean that the claims of members of those communities are not legitimate. But I have heard it used to delegitimize the claim of what I like to think of as bottom dog communities or marginalized communities against the top dog communities.
In support of that point, I will also point out that among marginalized communities, there is a lot of internalized bigotry of whatever flavor is appropriate. So I need to work on my own internalized queer phobia of lesbians, because a lot of them are TERFs, are lesbians who believe that trans women are not women, and or lesbians who believe that bisexual people don't exist. And this is causing me to see all lesbians colored in that light, and that's something I get to work on within my own community.
No, I mean, I think there's, like you said, there's always going to be a difference in each thing.
Sure.
We have to take it back to our own individual actions.
Can't hear.
We have to take it back to our own individual actions, and what exactly it is that we can do on our own lives to make it better. Yes, as Lori said, there's going to be people who disagree, or there's going to be people who think that this is happening differently, so I can't support them, or I can't do this. But what can you do? What can you do for somebody out there? What can we do for something that's different? And I want to just bring up this point about, a lot of these things have been said, and it makes me sad that some of the things we discussed in the cultural appropriation panel, some of those people aren't here today, even though they're on site. And I know they have not taken those issues to heart and changed their ways, and now they're cured of their cultural appropriation and racism. So I think we need...
They're digging in.
Yes, they are. They're digging in, and they're deciding to close down and shut off and just do those things because they were called out on those things. And I think we need to watch that and try and, like you said, not call them out, but nicely call them in and try and say, okay, well, maybe we need to think about this in a different light. Maybe we need to think about what you're doing in a different light. And if you want to honor respectfully, maybe take a different tactic as opposed to, I don't see color or I don't see these things happening, because that's not what the bulk of people who are standing in front of you are telling you. I don't need to yell because there's no traffic.
Thank you.
I have an observation from my own life, and I would like to take that observation and question for our panel, and that is, there's a word that I've never heard, and I don't know how to say it. It's M-I-S-C-E-G-N-T-I-O-N.
Miscegenation?
Say?
Miscegenation?
Miscegenation. There's a court case, I believe, it's Love versus Virginia, that kids don't have to memorize, or, well, I certainly never heard of it in school, and I was a school teacher, and it was never in the social studies textbooks. And that's a whole issue that we collectively sort of refuse to deal with. And my question for the panel is, what is a white person, and how has that changed over time, in the sense that,
Nice
in
question.
Rhode Island in 1632, and you were 116th,
Good question.
you know this,
No
then
Irish
you
can
were,
apply.
then you were 164th, or the whole Senator Pocahontas thing, and stuff like that, as well as the goulash thing, is a person
Jay,
who
Jay,
is
I think we've got your
23
question.
different white ethnic groups.
Jay, I think we've got your question,
Let
and
me
we're willing to
suggest-
take it as a panel now.
Let me suggest a book to you, and it's one that I just read this year, and I think it's excellent. It's written by Ibram X. Kendi, and it's in our reading list. It's called Stabs from the Beginning. Kendi talks about it, spends that book talking about the whole history of racist ideas in America and how they developed. But you're right, there is this question about who actually is white. Well, who decides who is white? Well, who decided who is white originally was Northwestern Europeans, because they were the ones who were carrying on the big colonization projects. It was largely the Brits who designed the system, but they lumped themselves among what they called the Nordic races. And that's a term that you find that you would read, for example, in Madison Grant's book, The Passing of a Great Race, that we are at the top. We represent not only the peak of social development, but some people would even say the peak of human evolution, and that everybody else is somehow represents some lesser stage. I mentioned Madison Grant specifically because Grant's book was written, I believe, in the 1920s, but it's still enormously influential today. Everybody heard about President Trump's shithole countries remark, right? What you may not have read or heard, because it didn't get reported quite as widely, is you're saying, well, why can't we have more immigrants from Norway?
Right.
Where did this Norway thing come from? Well, I'll tell you where it comes from. It comes from Madison Grant. Madison Grant said that the Nordic races were the only races who should properly be allowed to emigrate to the United States. And we know Trump doesn't read, but we also know he's surrounded by people who do read. One of whom is a certain person by the name of Stephen Miller. I want to characterize him for you right here because I don't want to go on record with what I really think of him. But I know that Miller reads. I'm sure Miller has read that book. I can tell you who else read Madison Grant's book was Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler read that book while he was in prison in Landsberg on a charge of high treason, which, by the way, he could have been executed, but it was only the interference of a bunch of rich industrialists who supported him in the NSDAP that kept him from being put to death. Because the beer hall putsch was an act of high treason, he could have been killed for it. But while he was in Landsberg doing his brief little stint in prison and writing Mein Kampf, he was also reading Madison Grant, and he wrote to Madison Grant thanking him for that book and telling him that book was one of the foundations of his social and political ideas.
I can touch on this longitudinally across the past century or so of history of the U.S. So, yeah, I've seen memes go around that say race doesn't exist. Biologically, they're correct. Sociologically, they're not. Sociologically, they are wrong, and this is one of the things that we, with our lack of melanin, really need to sit with and understand. What is white? What is whiteness? Who are considered white? Mandy is considered white or not white, depending on how whoever's doing the decision likes Jews today. The decision of who is considered the upper class in the U.S. has shifted significantly over time. It is, I guess, no longer taught in history books because they're too busy trying to teach standardized tests, that from time to time, the Italian Americans were not considered white, Irish Americans were not considered white, German Americans were not considered white, and that is a bigotry that goes back to before this country's founding. Benjamin Franklin, of whom you will hear many good quotes taken, several of which seem straight out of some solid medieval Icelandic poetry, is also on record talking about how he dislikes these swarthy Palatine boors. Sorry, Rob. Swarthy Palatine boors, by which he means the Pennsylvania Dutch, or what you and I typically gloss over as Amish. Who is considered white and who is therefore considered worthy of socioeconomic privilege is a moving target that always gets redefined in favor of who's on top, but it tends to always favor the rich tops from the countries that are now England.
Now, you mentioned these things not being mentioned in the social studies books, and you're absolutely right. And you may be more right than you know, because if you were to do any kind of a survey of, say, like high school level history books, you'll find that mentions of things like slavery, the reason for the Civil War, mentions of things like even like progressivism, the reason, and things like reasons why we have the safety regulations that we do. A lot of these things tend to come and go, and right now a lot of them are going because the people who are in control don't want this stuff talked about. They don't want this to become part of the background of kids' thinking. Right now, the Triangle Fire is disappearing from American history books. The Triangle Fire is one of the bases of industrial safety regulations in the United States. But you know, who cares that a bunch of Jewish girls are working in a sweatshop in downtown Manhattan died en masse in a fire because dear God, you know, it costs us, it costs us a few of our billions and billions of dollars to make sure that it doesn't happen again. Why should we even bother to talk about the fact that we maintain an apartheid regime in this country? That's what we had. People don't like to hear that word, but that's what it was. When you've got laws that say it's possible to sort people out by race and say that you can't be here because of your color, that's apartheid. And it was possible in the United States. It was legally acceptable in the United States until the passage of the Civil Rights Act. You mentioned Loving versus the state of Virginia. That was in 1967. People like to say, oh, that was a long time ago. How many of you in here are older than 60? That wasn't that long ago. We were all alive. We were kids in high school. I'm pushing 70, so I was 17, 18 at the time the Loving versus the state of Virginia was passed. You know, these things are not distant past. They're not only part of our immediate past in many cases, but we carry them right up into the current time. But they are part of the ground on which all the ideas and all the things for which we're trying to work with and sometimes trying to work against are based. And so we can't let that idea continue. But the problem is that right now we've got generations of kids being raised who will never learn about lawyer, who will never learn about the Civil Rights Act, who will only learn, well, there was some guy named Martin Luther King, but he was a long time ago. Who will not learn about why John Lewis is such a revered character. And that is a serious problem, and everybody who teaches or has ever taught or has ever written or ever read history needs to confront that and needs to deal with it, because we're in danger of losing a major portion of what should be making us better people and making us a better society.
If we could listen to that side of the panel too, and then move on to the next one.
I think there's a lot of things going on here. I mean, my former best friend used to be a New York City public school teacher, and she asked them straight up why slavery wasn't in the curriculum anymore. And they said, well, if we tell these kids about slaves, then they get really angry and they go down the street and they try and shoplift candy from the store. So she was told not to bring it up or not to talk about it in any way. And I was telling my priestess Miriam from the Blue Spiritual Temple, I was telling her this story, and I was like, isn't that terrible, isn't that terrible? And Priestess Miriam said to me, she's like, yes, it's terrible, but what's more terrible is that these kids don't feel positive and blessed enough in themselves to understand their own innate divinity. So we're not teaching that side of things either. We're not teaching about the beauty and the glory and the history of what we did do as a people, even with slavery and depression and all of these things. And I think it also, your question about whiteness and what is black brings up another question. I do have to mention in this context that Howard Stern called me a pleasing octoroon when I was on the show. I am a pleasing octoroon.
You
Well,
are,
pleasing
darling,
quadroon,
but really.
but whatever, I'm mulatto, whatever I am today. But I think there's also, for me as an anthropologist and a dabbling geneticist, there's also this question of genotype and phenotype, and what are we presenting? My daughter has red hair, so she's my daughter, she's a black girl, but when she walks into somebody, she knows that she presents as somebody that has fairer skin than I do and red hair, and that's how she wants to be seen. I used to say she was my day walker because I could shove her into situations to see who was going to be racist and who wasn't going to be racist, because we would find out that people would say things in front of her that they would never say in front of me. And what's really disturbing to me, especially in the witchcraft and pagan community, is there's a lot of people that with 23andMe and DNA research have found out that they may have some distant African-based ancestor, and they're using that as what I see as a basis for cultural appropriation. Because now they are commodifying religions, they're sort of cutting out those of us who do have melanated skin and do walk into a store and, you know, they'll, you know, check the security or, you know, whatever. Cops will undo their gun holster when I walk by or something like that. And that's not something that someone who isn't as melanated as me is going to experience on a regular basis. And that's a difference, and I think that's what really scares me, and that's where, you know, I paid some dues here, and I think that's what needs to happen, and that's what really, yeah, sure, we all got a lot of ancestors, but there's those of us that walk around and have to deal with that on every level, every day.
There's one quick note you mentioned about Lloyd versus Virginia. My wife is white. She refers to herself occasionally as a hillbilly. She comes from southern Missouri, and we have two children. Interestingly enough, both of whom, without any encouragement from us one way or the other, both of whom identify as black, and don't even try to identify them as anything else, or you're in for a fight. And my son's daughter, our first grandchild, is also part Irish and part Polish. so you know, and my wife and I, we were married 7 years after Loving was decided. Now we were living in the state we're living in California, where we were not facing miscegenation laws, but you know, that's how close to finally getting rid of that one little piece of American apartheid. Our relationship began just within a couple of years, and we were married a couple of years later and had children further down the road. So you had somebody back there.
Wait,
Matt has
Matt
a
just
response.
responded to that
Oh,
question.
I just want to say, it's interesting that we're talking about, you know, like varying degrees of whiteness. You know, Ailey and I were talking this morning in the shower. You know, and she's telling me about a book that I'd like to read called, you know, what was it called?
How Jews Became White, and what
Yes.
that says about racism in America. It's written by an anthropologist.
Yeah.
I haven't read it yet, but I heard good things about it.
So I just wanted to say that even though I don't really, I mean, like, you can choose, I still know that I have white privilege. Like, I'm not okay with it. And I just wanted to say that because, even though I'm a Jew and I know that my ancestral and not that far back, discrimination is a very extremely real thing. I mean, we just experienced the Tree of Life shooting at the synagogue I prayed at in Pittsburgh last October. So, I mean, like, it's real. It's there right now. The only time we can use our white privilege is when we're helping to dismantle white supremacy. You know, there were Jews right alongside the freedom. You know, there were Jews in the civil rights movement, and there are Jews in the current civil rights movement. So it's like if you're going to use your white privilege, now is the time to help dismantle the white supremacy. That's all I wanted to say, and then I want to move on to the next question.
Could we come to a quick agreement when we're doing the primary answer to the question that we have a timer on that too, like, I don't know, 3 minutes?
I mean, yeah, we're almost. I mean, it's.
Yeah, I'm just trying to make sure folks get to their lunch.
Yeah.
Okay, hi. This is, even within Blackbeard, there's degrees of shade. But here's one thing that has happened, and then I talked with many of my melanated friends, and we've all had this experience. And it's really group deep. Even people say, oh, I'm not racist. But anyway, you go into a store, security guy follows us. And I've seen this. They will follow a person of color, no matter if they're well-dressed or if they're just grungy. Whereas that same person, not of a darker complexion, will go in and they will blank over. I have to, when you deal with the police, I have to be almost yes sir, no sir, 3 bags full sir. I understand why with people of color, when they get upset, because they're stopped indiscriminately. And you get so bad, you get tired of tiptoeing and saying to the authorities like, oh, I'm the innocent black person, I'm harmless. Whereas another person, the other ethnicity, will never have that problem. And then there's the other thing, and I've had this many times with my so-called Caucasian friends. Well, they're acquaintances now. They would say, oh, you're not like most black people. Oh, you're not black. you don't act black, you don't look black. And it's like, what?
Sorry.
I'm black, you know, it's like, I go anywhere, they don't listen to how I speak, present myself in many places. The first thing they see is this. And I'll talk to people many a time, you know. If you're, I've had rides with friends, like for occasion, and cops pull us over. Why? What are you doing with that woman? Or if I've had a Caucasian child that don't even looks that way, they don't have to be. It's been, and that's what we live with every day. It's like almost appeasement so that we don't get killed. It happens to me less. It seems like the brighter you are, you know, the less toes you have in your face, the less likely you are to get it. But if you look like a Hershey bar, I'm telling you, you are automatically assumed, oh, they're dangerous, oh, they're big and black. And we have to protect ourselves. And people, they're just living their lives. And this is a day in, we live with it, we've internalized it. You know, it's not like, we don't even think about it, like with the cops. Most of us don't want to get shot. We won't sit up there and cuss out a cop like, F you, this and that. You know, we'll take the mild bet, or we'll let it go. And just to survive. And that's to this day. And, you know, and when you live it, it's internalized, you know. It's no getting rid of, it could be an equality could be happening right now, and they're still, they've been so damaged by it that they'll never recover. It's like a psychic and emotional damage, it's soul destroying, you know. So I'm a very positive person, you know. I'm, you know, sweetness and light, you know, whenever I can be. But still, there's always that lingering shadow behind, like, hey, this person, you know, in authority. Usually it's like the average Joe, it's like, okay, I don't care, you know. But you know, when you're dealing with authority figures or somebody official, you're always thinking in the back of your mind, are they seeing what I can do for them or what I'm presenting, or are they just seeing this outer shell? And 9 times out of 10, it's a shell.
Another, that's somebody else that had a, yeah.
Can I respond to that?
Oh, go ahead.
I just want to say, it's, what you're talking about speaks to so many experiences that my lighter friends of color have gone through. And there's a really great article on teenvogue.com about colorism, you know, and it's very real. It's very real. You know, people with less melanin get treated better by some people, but not by white people, but in communities of color. It's like a double-edged sword. So like, there's, you know, lighter people get treated better by the oppressors, but in the communities of color, then they're seen as have more privilege. And I'm not extremely well versed in you know, how to mitigate that, but it's very, very real. And also what you were saying about being in the store, I mean, Oprah herself,
Yeah.
the queen of all. Oprah was in a store in Switzerland and she wanted to see a bag that cost more than 5 houses. And the woman said, oh, well, she didn't know who Oprah was. And she said, oh, you couldn't afford that. And just like, when Oprah is the victim of such obvious racism, you know, and also to respond to what you were saying about being walking wounded, you know, people never being able to get rid of the psychic pain. You know, it touched on something Lilith had just said, which is not only are people not learning about slavery in school, but they're not being taught the beauty of the history and the divine legacy that comes from people's family and so I just wanted to thank you for bringing that up, and I wanted to respond to a couple things.
Yes.
I'm in Canada, but we were getting a lot of overlap, and we've had it in our system for quite a while. I've noticed again and again and again, what we're talking about safety regulations. There's large industries and people that are funding a lot of things to roll back protections on all fronts. Meanwhile, their foot soldiers, the people that they are actively funding, are not necessarily wearing swastikas on their shoulders, but very often are, or double lightning bolts.
Or Make Canada Great Again hats, which I always
There you
found
go.
a particularly strange move.
Oh yeah, yeah. We get the folks that where we had for 10 years very divisionary politics, right up the very top, where we were doing immigration and that. And when he thought he went down like the Hindenburg, they were crying in their beer until Trump came. And then everybody wanted to, by all means, go there.
So to fill what's probably going to be a largely US-based audience on some of the past few years of Canadian history, they had a PM called Stephen Harper, analogous to our president, but elected by very different means. And he was sort of a maple-scented Trump, and deliberately had destroyed a whole pile of environmental data. So that's fun. And now we've got Justin Trudeau, who we all understand is a very cute boy, and right? And he's doing his best, but you also have to understand that ideas that are considered wacky leftist radical ideas on this side of the line, 50 miles north of me in Ontario, are perfectly rational, centrist, moderate ideas, and why aren't you idiots doing them?
But a lot of the stuff was entrenched from
Yes.
the 10 years of Harper. Like, what happened?
Absolutely was, and now you've got the current Premier of Ontario, Doug Ford, who's trying to reinstate a lot of that at the provincial level, and out in Saskatchewan, you've got a gentleman by the name of Doug Shearer, who is so openly in the petro pocket, BC is sort of looking aghast at them from over the line.
As well as what originally, something we'd never had in Canadian politics before Harper, was the courting and actively recruiting the evangelicals, the fundamentalists. That was kept right at. There was about 6 months, there was about 9 weeks that Harper spent in a think tank in northern Wisconsin, think tank. And all of the Republican dirty tricks that are illegal here never were in Canada. It was a gentleman's agreement. You simply don't do that. And he came
then
back.
your politicians quit being gentlemen.
And immediately before running, courted and recruited the evangelicals and fundamentalists. Got all of the various different right-wing groups into one cohesive unit. And so they could happily goose-step their way into the future.
With the
That same
same
scenario.
dominionist rhetoric that has been the GOP's platform for the past 50 years and has only been accelerated in the past year.
Well, what they're using right now is a political blitzkrieg. You've always got at least 2 different groups that they're attacking at any given moment. So that the left is so busy doing damage control and trying to protect that, they don't get together.
I hear you,
And
and I completely respect the story you're bringing, but I also want to bring this back to being an
Well, that's kind
anti-racism
of what I was
panel.
doing.
And I really hear what you're saying, and yes, you are speaking truth, but we need to bring this back to topic and back to germane, because right now it's me, the American, agreeing with you, the Canadian, and that's not really moving enough.
Yeah, and actually, can I just touch on one point before we move on? I wanted to say that, racism in Canada includes, a lot of environmental racism as far as the pipeline, like what we have going on in Standing Rock. And also there's, a huge epidemic of missing Native women,
That's
people.
both sides.
Yeah, it is. And with regard to Trump and Maple Senate or otherwise, he's not the cause, he's just merely a symptom of something we need to be fighting.
And the First Nations and the pipelines conflict is one of those more nuanced things that is probably also outside the bounds of what this panel is intended to cover.
Real briefly, assuming racism is a cultural phenomenon, cultural construct rather than physically based, how do you feel that psychological stages, developmental stages, play into this? And what I mean by this is, for instance, there are developmental stages, for instance, that we all go through as children that allow us to move from I am my mother and father and I can't separate to individuation, to recognizing that, oh, I have my own perspective and somebody else has their perspective, you know, and eventually realizing that, oh, their perspective is real for them, just like my perspective is for me. So what I've noticed over the past 50 years is that unlike most of the people I meet from Europe or Asia or so on, at least in the United States, to a lesser extent the people I meet from Canada, it seems like that developmental process is actively inhibited by our educational system. And that supports the ongoing racism and power over dynamic.
Let me say one comment on that very briefly. I said earlier that racism is a problem for all of us. It's a problem for the entire society. Whether you think you're affected by it or not, the fact is that you are, because artificial boundaries have been placed around you and around your life and around your ability to engage fully with this society. And one of the artificial boundaries, coming back to a point you were raising about things being missing from the social studies textbooks, that's an artificial boundary that's been set up that says that tends to put some people on one side, in which case the white majority, and the people of color out on the other side. And I think if you are a white kid or a black kid or any kind or a person really any person of color or white growing up in the society, you're always aware of those boundaries, and you or if not aware of them, at least affected by them. The way you see the world is always going to be shaped by those boundaries. And as I said, they're purely artificial, but they are very powerful, and they can be permanent. They can become a permanent block to your being able to participate fully in society and your ability to allow others to participate fully.
Yeah, and then we have the question of generational trauma that plays into it. I think that's what also. Can I point you
One of the things that I just wanted to talk about is I grew up in a predominantly white area. My mom's white, she didn't really have that understanding of what it was.
Could you speak a little more loudly for us old folks, please?
Your microphone is also over there, so it needs to hear you too.
I grew up in a predominantly white area. I was, up until like my last year of high school, I was the only person of color in my high school. There was no Hispanic at all. And I was raised by my mom, who was white. And up until recently, it's been very hard to kind of talk about different things because I was always taught, you don't use the racism card, you don't use the like female card, and that was like anything that was even remotely related to my skin color or me being female. You're using the female card or the racist card, and it's like, and I've been in some situations that are obviously because of my color. We had a situation, me and him, where we had went to a store, and I had an item that was too large to fit in a bag. And I was walking out, and the greeter, whatever, popped off the wall, like, he had been, like, kind of leaning, just up against the wall, hopped off the wall, come running over to me like I was just stealing, like, all of this stuff. And he's like, I need to see your receipt, and he starts pawing through, like, all of my bags, not just the stuff that was unbagged and stuff, and it made me feel like crap. And, like, it was a very emotional situation for me. And I was like, well, why are you going, why am I being targeted? Because I really felt like I was being targeted. And he's like, oh, well, we have a policy that all unbagged items need to be checked. And the problem with that is there's people that had went out ahead of me that were carrying big items with no bag and no receipt in sight. And then there was also people behind me with no bag and stuff in sight. And the fact was, like, he was walking a little bit behind me. He's like eating like popcorn chicken and with no receipt or anything. And They didn't kind of like associate it with him with me. So it was just like, they didn't check him, they didn't ask for his receipt or anything, and they just kind of made me feel like garbage. And when I kind of brought it up, like I felt embarrassed that, because I felt like, oh gee, here I am, there's something racist in the part. And I've been made to feel ashamed because it was very obvious that it was, like my skin color. And
It got played at you first.
Huh?
I think the racism card got played at you first.
Yeah, and it just, and I've had some other situations. I had a situation that happened, unfortunately, here, and, that's kind of been brought up, but it's like that, I think it's like that whole racism card, female card, you're pulling that, oh, it's just that, and then it's like, it's not worth listening to because you played that card. And it's like, no, I didn't play that card, I wanted somebody to listen to me, so maybe it wasn't somebody's daughter, because I have 2 beautiful daughters and a beautiful son and beautiful granddaughters, and I don't want to see any of that happen to them because for me it was just a minor situation. But what happens if it wasn't? What happens if this person had followed me back to a tent or followed somebody else back to a tent? Like I was smart enough not to go back to my tent. I went to what I felt was a safe place and nothing was done. And I kind of let it go because it was like, okay, whatever. I told a couple people, nobody really listened. It wasn't like a big deal to them. And I'm like, okay, whatever. And then something happened later on, a year later, got blown up. It is what it is. But then I got angry because I let it go. And I'm like, you know what? I'm usually a person that I don't really speak up. I don't really say a whole lot about these things because I get that, oh, racism card, female card, But with everything that I've seen going on in this country, it's time for the quiet ones, people that maybe don't say a whole lot to speak up because this has got to stop. We are one family. Fuck the color. Fuck me being female. Fuck me being male. We're one family. We got to start acting like that. We got to start looking out for each other, regardless of any of that bullshit stuff that does not matter. Because there's more serious things to deal with than the color of my skin or my sexuality.
After something this important, I feel a little silly coming back to a really superficial aspect of some of the comments made. You were talking about race not being a biological, but being a sociological element. I mean, social construct is one of the terms they use for it. When I came to this country, some of you know it, but others don't. I'm from Israel, and I came to this country in summer. And I can say now that in this country I'm brown in summer and white in winter. Especially if it's Israeli summer. So I walk into a store, they stop me at the door, and I'm not going to go through all the details because many of you have been through that, but the point here is that I, like an idiot, didn't understand why they stopped me at the door. Because I had read about racism in the United States. I mean, who didn't? But it's one thing to read about it in books. It's another thing to be accidentally stopped at the door and then they hear the foreign accent and it's got a little bit of British in it and for some mysterious reason that made it right. And I didn't understand any of it until some brown and white friends explained to me what had happened. Because that is the level of inability to process the reality of a situation that we have when we have not experienced it before. That even with the best intentions, or even if we've read 1,000,000 books, we can't be in the skin of people this happens to. So that's one thing. The other one, if I may add another thing, is when I went to university here, they sent you all those papers, are you with this group, are you with that group, and if you tell us what ethnic group you are, then these are the events that this group has, and so on and so forth. And I'm looking, and there wasn't an other on the paper. There was white, there was black, there was Native American, there was, I forget all the categories, oh yes, and there was Asian. And that's about it, as I recall. Now, to the best of my recollection, when I went to school, they placed Israel in West Asia. There is no square for West Asia. And there
you
was
say
no square
Asia.
for other.
Yeah?
So I put it in Asia. So I got these wonderful invitations from the Polynesians to go to the luau's.
That's a lot of work.
And I went and had a great time, but you see my point. You were talking about how arbitrary these little squares are. And of course it goes a lot beyond just
And-
little squares on paper, but I just thought I'd
No,
mention
yeah,
it.
no, those are based on federal definitions of what they consider reasonable partitions to make, and it usually consists of who was loud enough to get a seat at the table, and Hispanic.
Oh, yes,
would be
right, there
another-
was
would be
Hispanic
another
as well,
box.
yes.
But Middle Eastern is not a box.
I know. I know. And that is also where I very strongly agree with that one other comment that you made when you were saying that the definitions have been shifting all the time.
You mentioned the book, How the Jews Became White. There's also a book called How the Irish Became White. One of the things that because of that, coming back to get to your point about social studies books, because there's such a complete lack of historical perspective on any of these issues. People don't understand that the same things you hear people saying about black people right now, how we're lazy, we're stupid, we're all just natural born criminals. They were saying the same thing about the Irish in the 1840s. They were saying the same thing about the Ukrainians who got sent out to the Western Plains back in the years just after the Civil War. They were saying the same things about the Germans, about the Eastern Europeans, about the Jews, about the Italians.
Palatine Boers.
It's just, it's
Yeah,
just.
the accusations are the same, yeah.
It's just, who said it was a moving target? It really is. It's just whoever happens to wind up at the bottom of the socioeconomic pile, who got stuck in the worst neighborhoods, who got stuck with the worst schools, who got stuck with the worst jobs, who got put on the extreme end of the extreme bottom end of the economic spectrum. They're the ones who get tarred with that brush. By the way, you've talked about geography. Do you know where the expression "wrong side of the tracks" comes from? Anybody know? It comes. The wrong side of the tracks was the side opposite the prevailing wind. If you lived on the side of the track, the side of the railroad, back in the days when steam-powered railroads, the real estate that was considered the least valuable and the place where the poorest people lived, where the worst off people lived, was on the side that was opposite the prevailing winds, because they got all the dirt and the soot and all the grime from the railroads coming through. If you take a look, I used to live in Waterloo, Iowa, and there's an area in Waterloo that's known as the Black Triangle, and it still exists. So basically, that's where most of the black people in Waterloo, Iowa live, and they're immediately east of the primary railroad line that runs through Waterloo, Iowa. And if you walk through there and do a little bit of industrial archaeology, you can still see the railroad lines.
Wow.
Yes.
So we can all agree that this is a big problem. It's systemic. It's been going on for a long time. What are ways that each of the panelists would recommend or suggest that we, as inclusive, tolerant people who are trying to push for civil rights, to end, basically, not end because I don't think it's possible, but to have the inclusive ideology prevail over the hateful ideologies? What are ways you can recommend that we can get involved starting now when we
Hey, can I take point?
Go ahead.
All right.
Do it.
So, because I think if you want to be a demyelinated person fighting racism, I think I can take point on this question. One, stop being Midwestern nice. Get a little Rust Belt directness up in here.
Yay.
So there is an organization within heathenry that very recently, their smoothest talker quit being their leader, and a triumvirate replaced him, and they dropped the rhetorical fig leaf that Mr. Smooth Talker had for 20 years. And I'm not naming them. I'm not naming any of them because fuck those jerks. They dropped the rhetorical fig leaf and talked about raising beautiful white families and masculine men and feminine women. And now, those of us who learned our dog whistles could finally turn to those who had not and said, do you see now? This is what we've been telling you for the past 20 years. And rest of heathens who really don't want to be tarred with the same brush said, oh, right. So we made, we as an Inclusive Heathens, made a statement we called Declaration 127, based off a particular verse in ultimately our book of Proverbs, Hallel. And it says, when you see evil, speak out against it and give your enemies no peace. So that would be my top advice to you. Quit being Midwest nice.
There's an article.
But you can be polite about it when you're calling it, when you're calling it out, when you're calling people in. You can say, did you maybe know that saying such and such is off the reservation is actually a direct reference to discussing indigenous folks who have gone off the reservation and are trying to act like they're white or something.
There's an article in the list, in our reading list, actually several articles, on anti-racism. There's one of them is by, I've mentioned his name a couple of times, Ibram X. Kendi, and he has a book coming out that I follow him on Twitter, and I kept kind of trying to nudge him toward giving me an advance copy so I could read it before this, and he wouldn't get up off the book. So I have to wait like all the rest of you mere mortals and get the book in August when it comes out. But it's a book called How to Be an Anti-Racist, and the basic idea is, of the articles that are included in the list, is it's not enough just to not accept racism. You really do have to sort of stand up and face it down. And that's really what it comes down to. And the principles and the ideas that are in the articles you could read in that list, and that Kendi talks about at the end of STEM from the beginning, and that he extends in How to Be an Anti-Racist, is simply that. You don't have to be, as Lori says, you don't have to go around looking to pick a fight, but you do have to take kind of an aggressive stance of saying, this ain't happening. I'm not going to allow this to happen around me. And everyone has to adopt that attitude that I always loved about from Walt Kelly and Pogo, who said you can't save the world, but you can try to make your corner of it a little bit better. And you take that stance and just apply it where and when you can, and nudge other people to do the same.
Yeah, I'd like to.
Yeah, I thought we'd just go down the line. I thought that would be easier. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I think, like I said before, I think there are all actions we can all take. I do want to say, you started that after I heard, I wanted to reach out to you after your incident, and I think some of the discussions that we've been having as a panel is we're going to come up with guidelines and recommendations and things that are going to get posted the same way that the stuff is posted in the bathroom about consent and things like that. And we would love people's input if they want to email us and stuff like that about how they think that should be. So I think, again, that's an action that people can take, reaching out to people when they know that something like this has happened. It's so funny because a lot of people hear these things on both sides of the issue, and people are really scared. People are really scared about speaking out. I'm not going to go into it for time reasons, but there was a cultural appropriation issue where I really felt like I needed to stand up for my godbrother, which Dr. too, and I spoke out on it, and people attacked me, but that was what I wanted to feel was right, because that's not how I feel what he was doing or anything that was in the situation that was happening. So in that instance, I spoke up too. In the instance with Starlet, I spoke up. I think we need to keep speaking up. And we need to keep speaking up and making sure, again, that Black voices are being heard. There's one article, and believe Black women, there we go. There's one article on there where I was, again, very vocal, both on the Pathos blog, and I also had an incident with Wild Hunt lately, where they chose a white male with less education than I did to speak about an issue that has to do with my religion. It can't just be me trying to complain about it because they're never going to listen. And it was funny because I called a lot of my Black friends and they're like, well, that's why Black folks don't read Wild Hunt, or that's why Black folks don't go to pagan events or don't read pagan media, because they feel there's such an anti-Black bias among all of us. And I think it's, you white people want to make us feel welcome, it's on you, there we go.
Yeah, that's, it kind of leads exactly what I was about to start into. You said like inclusive and tolerant, and what I think is to be inclusive and celebratory. It's not enough to just tolerate somebody. You have to make sure that they understand that you respect them and see their beauty and their divinity and all of the things they are. It's not, like, you tolerate something you have to do, like cleaning the bathroom. Yeah, I'm gonna, you know, but like, it's not, you know, it's not the same. So,
Yeah.
for me in my daily life, every single day, I make sure to listen to and center and uplift voices of color, friends, people I don't know, you know, and we have a really extensive reading list that I made printouts. If you don't feel
You
like,
know what, I'm gonna get that started passing around.
sure.
Yes.
I also have it linked on my website, which is fatmandymusic.com. And like, I have hyperlinks, so you don't have to like type in all the things. But if you want to just Google search the authors and the articles.
Can you clarify centering for people that may not be familiar with the topic?
So, yeah, it's really easy for white people to say what we want to say. You know, we have so much access, so you need to like shift the perspective and put people of color and their ideas and their voices in the middle. And it's not just that, it's also just hiring diversity. I'm a musician, I'm a band leader. I make sure to hire, my band is a very intentionally ethnically diverse band. I make sure to hire, I play jazz. I can't play jazz with all white people, that's redundant.
If I may interject, when you, as a white person, are called out on racist horseshit, do not make the apology about you. Say, you're right, I'm sorry, and then
Sit with it and learn.
sit with it and learn and move on. Sorry to interrupt you, Mandy,
Yeah, no,
but
it's all good, it's all good.
white fragility is a thing.
It is, yeah. Your white tears are just distracting to the conversation. You know, just stop crying and listen.
One of the things, and that in itself is actually a point. One of the things that I run into regularly, for example, if I'm reading comment sections on article racism, is that there is a whole list of what I call discourse killers that the middle class white people use to try to shut the conversation down. You know, race card.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to say. The race card. It's not a freaking game. It's not a card. Nobody's playing cards. It's real. It's a real goddamn thing that people have to live with every day. So when Starlet feels that she can't talk about a very real situation because she's playing a card, you know, that's a very common thing. It's not a game.
And the
And
race
you-
card
and-
is played, is the accusation made by people who are at that moment playing with a full deck of white cards.
Yes, exactly. Very good, yeah.
And where I would want to gently question and challenge a aggressively, Unitarian isn't quite the right word because that accuses Unitarian universalists. A conceit that suggests we should all act as though we were the same. I really want to challenge that in a way that I hope is not awful of me. I think the stronger course is for us to come to a more pluralistic understanding that there is more than one way to do everything, that there are at least as many ways to human as there are human bodies to human with. And there's more than one way to do everything, and other people aren't just failed versions of being you.
Yes.
So I'm really excited to hear so much compassion and interest to make sure that our entire race of humans, who all live in the same village called Earth, are treated fairly. But even in such a fair-minded and uplifting community as Brushwood, last night I was the recipient of a racial protection from someone outside the group. And so I'd like to share this because the moral of the story is I've heard a lot talked about today of who's white, who's black, what's the shading. So first let me start by saying as a female Jewess raised in Kansas, who was the only Jew in my grade school, who had 4 Jews within an 8-year span through junior high and high school, who has olive skin and has been called anything from Indian to Mediterranean. Last night, and somebody who was so zealous, and I honor their enthusiasm to fight against racism, came up to the booth and said, "Do you realize your menu is racist and offensive?" Oh, I didn't know my menu was racist and offensive. Please educate me. Gypsy rice. Okay? The restaurant name is Gypsy World Cuisine. Oh, but gypsies find that offensive. Now, this was not somebody who claimed gypsy lineage. And I said, I do not. And they said, and so we got into a discussion. I have Judaic and Romani blood. I carry that lineage. And in their zeal to protect against racism, by being outside the group and judging by appearance, I ended up feeling verbally assaulted by someone who was trying to protect the very issue they were raising. And so in answer to what do you do in everyday life, number one, don't make assumptions. Number two, if you're going to promote a cause, be sure that when you're speaking to somebody, you're not speaking to somebody who knows the cause better than you do. And if they do, you might want to open ears rather than mouth. Now, the way I handled it perhaps was a bit offensive because I had said that in my cultural reading, the great deal of racism, he talked about being the other, us versus them. And that whether that's sociologic, whether that is economic, certainly here within this camp, we see it within gender and gender identity. Anyone who is in an alternative relationship, anyone who is in a mixed color or religion relationship, anyone who is a woman who chooses to wear pants or a man who chooses to wear a skirt, has faced the discrimination of our culture and chosen to step outside our culture to claim our own identity. And if we take racism and gender and cultural appropriation outside of the us, but we're still talking us versus them. Even the way we address the problem, our language is still creating division. So thank you for letting me kvetch about the schmuck that acted from kindergarten, all of which is culturally appropriated here in the United States, because if you're not Native American, then everything here in this country is culturally appropriated. And if you don't like that answer, come see me and I'll stick you with my acupuncture needles.
Yes, you had a comment?
I'm Pierre. I'm fairly new to the Brushwood community. This is my third year here, first time for the full 2 weeks of the festival. I'd just like to say one of the things I came across. I'll admit I'm young for who I am. About 12 years ago in high school, maybe a little bit longer. I came across a realization that as much as everybody goes, I'm not racist, we're all a little bit racist because it's been ingrained into us from our heritage. Our parents are being racist without even being meaning to be racist. All learned behavior because I coined this quote as my senior quote. We cannot control what we learn and what we teach. And it's something I want to spread that message because it's so important because sometimes you don't even know what you're doing. I've had moments in my past where I found myself having that thought and I'm like, whoa, where is this coming from? It's not who I am. Tempers run hot in my family and I've made myself specifically to have the most even temper I've even met. Like, you can ask her. In the 8 years she's known me, I've won my top points. And my family, I'm Mohawk, so we're inherently known as having very hot tempers. It's one of those things. And, sorry, rambling. But I just want to get that point across. And another thing I do, I am a security professional, so I work hand in hand with the police departments. And I do see a lot of that stuff where it's that social, they're usually the problems when we watch them. And so often in the security officer, I see them leaning towards that way. I'm like, you didn't realize what you just did. Like, think about what you said. And I had one gentleman, I was a supervisor at the time, so was he. And he just made this comment, and I'm like, do you even know what you just said? He's like, what do you mean? And I guess, all right, you need to leave. tomorrow when you realize what you said, you came back and like, I didn't even realize what I said. Like, no, I know you did. At college, you're great doing security detail, and there's a lot of people of color, and you just happen to make an off-color comment about it, and it's like as a security professional, you don't have that leeway. You're a bastion of safety, and that's one of the things I want to bring to Brushwood, and I want to be part of this community. I want to help the safety crew become that bastion of safety, that sanctuary that this place is supposed to be, so that they know what to do. Anybody who wears the cone or wears that bandana knows that if someone comes to you and you don't know what to do, you move up the line and go, hey, come on over here, we're gonna go talk to somebody who can do something about this. Not just, oh, okay, and stare blankly at it.
I'm excited that
Excuse me, my apologies to the panel, but I'm teaching a workshop shortly,
Yes,
so I have to
and
leave.
I want to say real
Thank
quick,
you.
it is 12:35.
Thank you very much.
End at 12:30. Participants keep hanging out here, but if you're doing something at 1, this is your cue.
So, we have participant evaluation forms, if you could please fill them out before you leave, or
Sure.
remember to fill them out later. And maybe in the comment section, mention to Brushwood leadership that we do want some kind of guidelines, that will help us, talk to them after the season is over and be like, hey, what are we gonna do about this? I'm really excited you're joining the security force.
And thank you all for
And
coming
thank
and
you
being
for
here and for
coming.
your attention. That means a great deal to all of us here.
And any Canadians who are watching, I think I said Doug Portis from Saskatchewan, he's no longer with us. Sorry.
Correction for
Are
accuracy.
there any other questions while we can still take a couple more?
What was your, I was
or bring
curious
them
what your question was.
Yes, ma'am.
So I didn't want to make it too specific, but I was curious as to just kind of your take on, it's a little bit of colorism and culturalism, right? I come from an Egyptian background, and to be honest with you, I feel ostracized from both communities. Not both, right? But both from definitely from the white side. I don't consider myself that. And if I refer to myself as African American, I actually get pushback from the Black community, despite being born on the land of Africa and that being my roots. So I was just, it's a bit of colorism, it's a bit of culturalism, and I struggle with it. I just honestly wanted to hear your thoughts. It's not so much a broad question as much as it is the Middle East is slowly coming about as an identity being recognized in the white world. Like you said, the Middle East is not a box that's checked. But especially for North Africans who claim both identities, right, and who consider themselves people of color, how do you respond to, honestly in this case, not just white people, but people who want to dismiss me because I'm white for what one thinks is African?
One thing I can tell you from having had sort of an opposite experience, I was in Morocco a couple of years ago, and it was really a stunning experience of walking around in a place where the only respect in which I was immediately perceived as a minority was in the fact that I didn't speak Arabic. It was funny because people would walk up to me, they immediately thought I must be some kind of Arab, because I wasn't dressed like Bozo the Clown, so I didn't look like an American tourist. But they would immediately walk to me and want to speak Arabic to me, and I speak about 15 words of Arabic on a good day, but I could speak a little bit of French, and realizing that I was kind of seen as one of them, but what kind of an African are you? Was a fascinating experience, but you're right. There is the same kind of block identity inside of every community, and including Black Americans. I get looked at suspiciously because I don't talk right. I don't sound like what they think I don't sound like them. And it's me like, you're not from here, are you? No, I'm from Queens. You're right. That is something that we all have struggled with. I mean, even to the extent of, I was just reading an article about how in school, paying attention in class and doing your homework and earning A's and B's is acting white. My kids both did okay in school. That was acting white, and they were among the few white kids going to school in a largely white suburban in a white suburban high school, and the black kids kind of looked at them suspiciously, like they weren't, they weren't doing their thing. Succeeding in school was considered, playing the man's game. Of course, my son is now a criminal defense attorney, and my daughter runs a small business. So they're doing quite well. But yeah, you're right. That is not something that I have an easy answer for. If you step outside of what people have decided to create for themselves as the social boundaries with which they're comfortable with, and you try to come in from the outside and you don't fit that boundary, you're out. There are going to be people who are simply not going to be willing to accept that.
I get it all the time. I get it from both sides, especially since I have a public persona, so I seem to get attacked from all sides. I wish it wasn't different. I wish it was, whatever, a perfect world. We have a deity. It's funny, I woke up crying this morning. We have the deity called our Zulufuga, which is the tears, because she just wants people to be better. She wants them to do the right thing. She wants them to always say the right thing. I think for me, again, I got that in school. I was educated, I was smart. All the black kids hated me, you know what I mean? But for me, it really, not that it's not, they're obviously everybody's people, but there's a very different way to navigate those two spaces. And if I remember that, there's a reason we code switch. There really is. This is how I am in this particular arena, and this is how I am in this particular arena. And that makes the whole experience much gentler and more inclusive for me. And I'm not doing it in the same way, like you said, if I'm in Germany, I'm going to speak the words of German that I know, because I know I'll be understood. And if I'm around a bunch of African American people, I'm going to talk more about Beyonce. I was, getting information with my goddaughter, who's very white and from New Jersey, and she's never even heard any of this. And I'm like, what? So it's just things that are going to be, common ground, I think, and that's that you're going to have common ground on both sides, and it's going to be hard. No, of course. Sure.
My son started college at a state technical school in Ohio, and there were Jamaican students in the school. I happen to be half Jamaican. Yeah. Who's you tell?
Yeah, right.
Funny, look Jamaican, but my son was talking to these Jamaican kids, and my son considers himself black. And he's mixed race. He's half black, but my son identifies as black. And and as I said earlier, he took that identity on himself. He said that's who I am, or I deal with the guys. And the Jamaicans were really sniffy around him, like, well, no, he wasn't real. Because he was half white.
Yeah.
He was the wrong color. He didn't talk right. Nothing about him matched their cultural frame. And I was thinking, this is really funny. He comes from a half Jamaican father and Jamaican kid.
I just really wanted to say, I have a lot of Middle Eastern friends and Egyptian friends, and they have the same experiences. There's a group I belong to online, and they also do events IRL called the Sisterhood, the Shalom Sisterhood, and it's Jews and the Arabic women, and they just had a big international trip to Germany to go to the death camps, and we do political work in the United States, but it's if you wanted to look that up, or if you want to give me your Facebook info, I'll add you to the group. But yeah, it's real. Like there's. So I don't know how to help you or anything, but I just say you're right.
I'll tell you, we don't have a solution, but you're looking at 4 people who will support you.
Yeah,
That much we can do.
I'm seeing a next thing trying to set up in the corners, so we're going to need to clear out.
Thank you guys
Very much. Thank you all so much.
And it doesn't have, and listen, one quick thing before we disperse, it does not have to end here, and it shouldn't.
Amen. This is just to talk, to open the doors.
And we are all here for the rest of the week. If you want to buttonhole one of us and sit and talk a little bit, hey, we'll make time.